Are we free? The word free is commonly used in our day to day conversation like, hey, are you free today? Which is more to do with time, or is this for free? Which is referring to not paying for a particular thing. Or am I free? Which is more like an existential rhetorical question to oneself as to what am I doing with my life? And in this video, we will be focusing in the third aspect of being free, which is human freedom and what it means to be truly free. Hey guys, thank you for stopping by and welcome to another episode of Making Sense of Life with me, Mario. Freedom is something that is basic to human living, and without it, human life would not be possible. Today, being 15th August, is the day when India celebrates its independence, a day when we remember all those great men and women who fought for the freedom of India. But are we truly free? This question has a universal appeal because, in as much as many other countries too would be celebrating their own Independence Day at different times of the year, the understanding of human freedom in its truest sense is paramount if we ever want to make sense of our lives, irrespective of where we may be from. So, what is freedom? Many would want to think that freedom is being able to do what one wants, whenever they want, or however they want, to put it in one phrase, without any restriction. But if such were the case, what difference would there be between us and an animal who acts on its instinct? When it is hungry, the animal goes looking for food, or when it is mating season, it looks out for a potential partner to do the job. There is no preconceived thought process about if it is the right thing, or is it morally right, or is it sensible, and so on. I guess my point therefore is that if we ever want to make sense of what human freedom truly is, it is always a freedom for something rather than a freedom from something. It is about what one ought to do that is right. It is such a wonderful coincidence that the feast of the Assumption of Our Lady also falls along on this auspicious day. And I firmly believe that the example of our Blessed Mother shows us by her own actions about what human freedom truly is. Archbishop Fulton Sheen once described Mary's gift of self as the freedom of total abandonment to God. He wrote, "Our free will is the only thing that is really our own. Our health, our wealth, our power, all these God can take from us. Because our freedom is our own, it is the only perfect gift that we can make to God. And when we offer our freedom back to God as a gift, when we live as servants of the Lord like Mary did, our lives are not deprived, but are rather enriched. Left to our own selves, we make decisions focused on a limited vision of life. We pursue our fallen, disordered lives. We are enslaved by 1,000 fears, insecurities, and weaknesses. Yet we think we are free and in control of our lives. It is only in learning to give up our freedom to do whatever we want and by entrusting our lives entirely to God, who knows what is truly best for us and desires our happiness, that we discover the deeper freedom to live life to the fullest, a freedom that is possessed only when we live totally in the Lord's plan. Now, for this to happen, a great deal of humility is required, and although many Protestants would want to think that Catholics worship Mary as a goddess, the fact of the matter is that it is not true. Worship is reserved only for God, but we venerate the Virgin Mary as the Mother of God for who she is and her yes to the will of God. You can also check this out in Luke chapter 1 verses 38. Too often, many Protestants try to downplay the role of Our Lady in the birth of our Blessed Lord, like as though to say that God could have just chosen any woman to bring forth His Son into the world. But logically speaking, if we were to believe that Jesus is true God, it cannot happen that God could have just chosen a random woman haphazardly to be the mother of His Son. Her birth was predestined as one chosen for a specific purpose. If you'd like a more detailed explanation into this, you can check out my blog post reflections where I have written about this in detail. The links are in the description. Besides, Our Lady would never take credit for herself and on the contrary gives praise and thanks to God, which can be seen in her Magnificat. You can also find this in Luke chapter 1 verses 46 to 55. Saint Francis de Sales writes that humility is necessary at every moment and for all, even the most perfect. In like manner, the church frequently repeats the words of Saint Augustine on the need of humility, who said, "Do you intend to begin to build up a high building of sanctity? First of all, think of putting a solid base of humility, because the higher the building, the deeper the foundation must go." There is a difference between verbal humility and experiential humility. It is easy for someone to say, "I am weak, I am a sinner, I need God in my life." But it is completely different to experience at the core of one's being the truth about how weak we really are, how totally dependent we are on God. Our blessed Lord Himself said, "Apart from me, you can do nothing." John chapter 15, verses 15. The humble person knows how true this statement is, and he knows this is not just an abstract spiritual principle, but it is his own personal experience. Saint Teresa of Avila would explain it the following way when she said, "Humility is nothing but truth itself, which is the truth about ourselves." Humility is the answer to the twofold question about who God is and who am I. From the answer to these questions follows a knowledge of our lowliness compared with God's greatness, of our nothingness to the strength and power of God. Humility is a state of mind and awareness of God's in our lives and our dependence upon Him. It does not mean a denial of any gifts or talents which He may have given us, but it certainly does forbid that we glorified as if we alone were responsible for the gifts and talents that we possess, as St. Paul wrote in his first letter to the Corinthians. "What have you that you have not received? And if you have received, why do you glory as if you had not received?" 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 7. Some people may want to think of freedom from purely a socialist standpoint, which is to say that those who lack the basic necessities of life like food, clothing and shelter cannot be completely free. And while no doubt it is true to an extent, the choice and the freedom still remains whether to remain in that particular state, or that person can choose to make a difference in his life positively by taking action. This therefore raises the question as to how do we define a slave? If we look up on Google, we find that a slave is defined as a person who is forced to work for and obey another and is considered to be their property, or as someone who is controlled by another. But at its root, if we dig further, a slave is basically one whose freedom of choice is limited in scope. Hence, to increase his freedom would mean to increase his awareness of the options from which he could choose. Achieving this would entail changing the structure of the world in which he lives so as to offer him more real possibilities for choice. The same could be said of a man immersed in poverty, not just materially or financially, but also in terms of psychological, emotional and spiritual, who has fewer choices and therefore fewer possibilities. And so applying this in the context of sin, when we say a person is a slave to sin, whether that is through being addicted to pornography, alcohol, excessive shopping or any other vice or thing that is harmful and unproductive, he is basically limiting or creating his own walls and thus limiting his possibilities. Thus, I think true freedom can be best understood in the words of Saint Augustine, who said, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in you," which obviously is referring to God. And this is to say that true freedom makes sense within a moral framework which is ultimately in God, who is the source of all that is good. Secularist versions of modernism have found it difficult to accept this standpoint, not because they want to deny it, but because they cannot see a way to include an underlying realm of value in their overall account of human reality. If a person is committed to the worldview that holds that the universe is having no ultimate design or purpose to it, or that human life was just a random accident due to the blind forces of physics operating by means of the evolutionary process, it is hard to see how he can arrive at any theory of morality from such a view. The problem then is not how can we be inspired to live a moral life based on the valueless view of human existence and the universe, but how can we justify a moral theory based on this view? This therefore goes to point that there is indeed a transcendent aspect to human existence because it is already endowed with value which no individual has ever brought to or created, but which we recognize will exist even after we are gone. This experience of transcendence is the affirmation of God. The fact of the matter is that we are not our own, as found in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verses 19. Human life is embraced by a living reality incomparably more dynamic and free than we are, and while no doubt the possibility of misusing or abusing our freedom lurks, where we can lock ourselves in the presence of our minds or shut ourselves from divine reality or any universal ethical norm, it does not have to be that way. If we are ready to respond to our reality with openness, humility, and fidelity to what the philosopher Gabriel Marcel would call the solicitations from the beyond, then perhaps our lives would indeed truly become an embodiment of a gracious presence, which is something we see in the life of our Blessed Mother, whose feast we celebrate today. The dogma of the Assumption of Mary is the solemn assertion that one of our race, that she who is the type of the whole Christian people, does indeed live here and now, the eternal life with Christ, as the Jesuit theologian Karl Rahner put it. She who by faith has received salvation for herself and for us all, and received it totally, for it is the salvation of a whole human being. Our Lady understands the truth of the human condition. She understands how small she really is. She knows that on her own she is nothing and that she is completely dependent on God. Our Lady thus exhibits Christ's teaching that the humble will be exalted. In her we can already see our destiny. In her glorious Assumption we have the assurance that our death is a going to the Lord, to be with the Lord forever. And so we can thus infer that for the Christian there is the firm hope of life beyond death, as the Assumption of Our Lady is a promise of heaven. Only when we are convinced, like Our Lady was, of how little we can really do on our own and how utterly dependent we are on God, can the Lord begin to act in magnificent ways in us and through us. And that is what true freedom really is. If you have drawn any value in this video, I would greatly appreciate if you could like, share and subscribe if you haven't already. Until then, take care and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching and God bless you.